started here. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this fifth and final episode in our Natural Lawn and Garden series. My name is Cameron Reed, and I'm the Environmental Program Specialist here at the City of Shoreline. I just want to say that this workshop series is funded with a grant from King County, or the Hazardous Waste Management Program in King County, which seeks to reduce hazards to the community from toxic substances, help us find safer alternatives to toxic products, and properly dispose of the ones we have. So tonight, I'm really excited to have Laura Motter and Reingard Reiger here with us again to talk about practices that we can use this fall to winterize our garden in a way that really, actually improves it, makes it healthier, creates habitat for wildlife, and just sets us up for, a success and a flush of life in the spring. Laura and Reingard are Pacific Northwest gardening experts from the Garden Hotline, which, if you don't know about, it's an awesome free resource for King County residents that you can call them up Monday through Saturday with just about any gardening related question during their business hours, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So we're super excited to have Laura and Reingard here with us again tonight. But before I turn it over to them, just a little bit about why we are doing this and some few logistics for the evening. So if you're new to Shoreline, our community has just a really strong ethic and commitment to protect our environment, which includes our streams, our lakes, Puget Sound, and all the aquatic wildlife like salmon or orca that depend on these ecosystems. So this pushed City Council and the city to earn certification from Salmon Safe, which is a nonprofit that looks at buildings and farms and campuses and through the lens of whether they are safe for salmon. So we went through that in 2018, 2019, and are still fulfilling some of the requirements there. But as it turns out, our whole community is really connected by water. So here we have an image of Richmond Beach, Apple Tree Lane, and you can just imagine, the rain falling on the kind of uphill side and just running down off of people's roofs and lawns and driveways and the streets, and finding its way into the ditches and the storm drains and eventually out into our lakes, streams, and Puget Sound. And so the problem with this is that most of that water is not really treated. So if there's any chemicals or any oil pollution or pet pollution on these surfaces, then that gets washed into the waterways. So there's been a ton of research on this. I won't go into it here, but basically they found a lot of the common pesticides that are used in a lot of common landscaping practices in basically all the waterways around Puget Sound, and more in the urban areas. So these obviously cause huge problems for salmon and other wildlife. And some of these practices can lead to algae blooms in our local lakes, which would also close them to swimming and recreation. So just not a good deal. There's the Salmon Safe logo. And last but not least, a lot of these products are actually considered hazardous waste. So anything that says caution, danger, obviously if it says, or warning, or if it says poison or something on it, then it's actually so hazardous that we don't want it in the normal trash, and you have to take it to the hazardous waste collection facility that can safely handle that. So, just imagine if you're putting this stuff out in your landscape, you think of kids or think of pets that are, and then, wildlife as well. So basically, how can we make support our community's efforts to be safe for everybody, and make a really awesome, attractive, healthy yard in the meantime. So a brief spiel here. If you want to go pesticide free, if you already have made that commitment or want to make that commitment, you can, we'll actually provide you with a little pesticide-free zone sign with the ladybug. You might have seen them around. You'll just go to this website and fill out the request form, and we'll send it to you in the mail. So I also have some awesome raffle prizes left. I know some of you have already received some. We have Waltz Organic Earthworm Casting. So it comes in a 15-pound bag. And it's just a great all-purpose soil amendment. You can use it even indoors on potted plants. You can use it on lawns or in your veggie garden or your landscape beds. We have a weeding tool. It's not this exact one, but it's the Weed Hound brand, and it is great for pulling things like dandelions and other things that have a deep central taproot. Then last but not least, the grand prize, one lucky person from today will get to win 1 yard of Cedar Grove organic compost delivered to your yard or driveway. So yeah, just a great way to kickstart your landscaping, and fall is being a good time to apply that product. So I'll announce, or I'll provide you the opportunity to enter the raffle right before we do Q&A at the end of tonight. For the compost, the other two you'll just be automatically entered in. You can always turn them down. But for the compost, you do have to be a Shoreline resident. Okay. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So before I turn it over, we'll be going till about 7:50. And then we'll stop and take questions for both of our presenters, and most likely be wrapped up 8:15 or 8:20. You can use the Q&A button on Zoom. If you're new to Zoom, it should be at the top or the bottom of your screen, a little Q&A button to ask questions as we go. And then we'll kind of, if they're not addressed in the presentation, we'll answer them at the end. You can also, there's a little thumbs up button. You can like somebody's question, and that will bump it to the top of our list. Feel free to reach out using the chat if you do have other questions. And before we get going, I'm just going to launch a really quick icebreaker poll. So the poll should be showing up, and this is just to get a sense of who's here tonight and kind of get us thinking about our yard care practices. So if you don't mind, just take a quick minute or two and fill out this poll. And this, again, helps us kind of see who's here and evaluate the program as well. So appreciate you just taking a minute to do that. Awesome, thank you. And I'll give people just 2 minutes. And Laura, were you wanting me to do the raffle poll now as well, or is that okay to wait till the end?
No, it's fine. I just think the last class, we both almost forgot about this one.
Totally, yep, that's true. Thanks for the reminder. Awesome, we're almost there. I'll give people just like 20 more seconds to vote. I'll go ahead and share the results too in just about 10 seconds so you can see them. We'll give people 5 more seconds. Oh, we're almost there. Yep. Awesome. Thank you very much. In the poll, I'll just share those results briefly so you should be able to see. Like most of us are taking care of our yard and using mulch and native plants out there weeding by hand. So awesome. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Laura. So take it away.
All right. Okay. So for folks who have been following along for all of the classes that came before, you will see some repeat information tonight because we are going to be talking about what you do right now in the garden, which we have made mention of in the other classes where we're talking more conceptually about how to design a yard or what's good soil all about. So right now, there are many things we can do in the garden to really get it going and ready for the spring. And we tend to think about fall as a time when we're done gardening, but really it's a great time to do so many things. We want to show you what those are. So first, I just want to do a little background on the maritime Northwest climate. Whoops, sorry about that. We sit in a very precious space in the Puget Sound lowlands, where we are protected by Coast Range and the Cascade Range, the Olympics and the Cascades on either side of us. We have this trough that tends to warm up because of the big body of water of Puget Sound, Salish Sea, that runs from Olympia all the way up through up past the San Juan Islands. We benefit from that by having warmer winters and cooler summers, which keep our temperatures from getting too extreme. Within that, though, we have other climates that are a little bit different. So depending on where other people live in this area, they might get more rain, less rain, hotter temperatures, colder, like up in Bellingham, it tends to get colder than it does here in Seattle. So Seattle, Shoreline, Renton, Kent starts to get a little bit even more extreme than our area does. We're pretty blessed with that. As you get up into Shoreline, of course, you're getting into the convergence zone and you get a lot more weather like some of what we saw today. I know that there was some pretty heavy thunder and lightning happening earlier this morning. We also have access to this fabulous map that Washington State University maintains, which has weather stations all around Washington State. And in this area, we have several that are close by. There's one out near Bothell. There's one at the Center for Urban Horticulture in Seattle that can give you information about air temperature and relative humidity and rainfall, but it also tells you about winter soil temperatures. And this is important because this helps us know when we can still be working in the soil. And you can track that daily if you want to and see if it's really appropriate to be digging in the soil. If the soil starts to get too cold, you can cause damage to it if you're digging around in it. So this helps us know if we can plant things, what we can plant, when it's early enough to plant or warm enough to plant the early things in the spring as well. And then we have lots of ways to track precipitation. Of course, this is a Seattle precipitation chart from 2019, which shows the kind of rainfall that we get and when. And this also matters in planting. So one of the things we'll be talking about tonight is about planting and why you plant in the fall. And October obviously has an increase in rainfall. And then you've got more as you go through into November and December as well. So this helps to, with that warmer soil temperature that's still happening and that rainfall, helps for roots to develop in the soil. So great time to plant trees and shrubs because they will develop a really great root system. So in the fall, it's a great time to plant because the air temperatures are cooler. So there's less stress on the plant when you put it in. Anytime you plant something new, you disturb the roots a bit. And so the plant gets a little bit stressed out. It's going to still be transpiring as it's moving nutrients and water up and through the plant. And so you need to be able to protect it when you transplant. So cooler temperatures are one way that can help. Soil temperatures, as I mentioned, are perfect for developing roots. And then all that rain that's gonna be happening is great. So a day like today is perfect because it rained a lot, soil's wet. You run out there and plant when the sun's out, and then you let it rain and water it in for you. This is also a really good time to take stock of the structure of the garden. As the leaves start to fall off the trees, you can see sort of the silhouettes of your plants. You can make plans for pruning. You can decide whether that plant is in the right place or not. And for some plants, actually move them if it's time to move them. So there are many things we can plant. Of course, traditionally, we know we can plant spring bulbs. This is a classic time. All the bulb catalogs have come in the mail. You can sit down and plan out what you want, order them. You see them at the stores right now. Great time to be planting things like tulips and daffodils and crocus and all the different spring flowering bulbs. But we also can plant trees and shrubs. Perfect time, as I mentioned, to get those root systems developed, especially something deciduous that's starting to lose leaves or has lost its leaves, because it's not trying to put new growth out. So it's going to put all its energy into building roots. Perennials, great time to plant them. You can plant them from pots that you buy at the nursery. You can transplant what you have in your garden. You can divide garden stock that you have. Say you have a hosta that's getting really big, you could pull that apart and make 3 new plants out of it. So it's a great time to be making new plants as well. If you like the look of sort of a wildflower garden, grassy area, this is a great time to be planting like native grass seed and wildflower seed together. And you can make a sort of a little prairie or wildflower meadow in your garden. The seeds for the grass will come up quickly. The wildflower seeds will generally wait till spring, but they often need that cold period over the winter in order to germinate properly. So nestled in with the grasses is a good time to get them going. And then if you have a vegetable garden, this is when you're going to be planting your garlic and shallots. You do these from bulbs. You get the whole, you get the bulb and you break it apart into cloves and plant those. And then you can plant snow pea seeds, which will winter over. They just get small and then they sit for a while. And then next spring, you'll have a very early crop. You can transplant winter hardy vegetables. So if you have things that are already, you know, in a 4-inch pot that are decent size like kale or cabbages, you can put those in. And if you have a space that you're clearing out for from summer plants, but you don't want to plant anything new in it, you can put cover crop in, and we're going to talk a bit about that tonight. And then of course, if you have a lawn and you're trying to refresh it or you want to put a new patch in, you can plant lawns now from sod or seed. Fall is, you don't want to go too much past November, and we're starting to see that temperatures may drop this weekend. But the fall, September, early October, is usually a great time for putting lawns in because grass is a cool weather plant. When you're making your plant choices, of course, you want to pick the right plant for the right place. You don't want to put things in that are going to outgrow the area. So plan for what the height and width of the plant will actually be. A good way to do that is to go out and look at plants that are mature in a landscape, in a garden, in the neighborhood, and find out what that plant really is going to look like. What you see in a 1-gallon pot in the nursery doesn't always give you the clue of what that plant's going to develop into, what the shape will be. You want to be aware of how the weather moves in our region. The map I showed you, we are open from the southwest, so winds come up through the southwest, and those are generally warmer, wetter winds and weather patterns. Coming out from the north, we get a lot of cold and, you know, frosty weather and snow. So, you know, pay attention to what's happening in your yard, what's exposed, what's protected, how does the house protect from these kinds of winds? Do you have plants that drop leaves? So you have sun and shade seasonally. Maybe it's very shady under your Japanese maple in the summertime and not in the winter. What are your soil conditions in your yard? Because that'll help you make choices. And then think about how you can group things to provide windbreaks or to provide areas that warm up the yard so that you can create microclimates that make it more frost-free, where your tender plants can go, those kinds of things. So microclimates happen in every garden. They happen in that larger map setting that I showed you, where you see the prairies in Olympia area, and you know, we have the rain shadow up in the San Juans and up in Sequim. Those are areas that are affected by geography around them, but this can happen on a micro scale. So we talk about microclimates in gardens as areas like right next to a rock that might heat up with sunshine on it during the day and radiate heat back out at night to warm up the plants around it. Or a water feature that could also warm up the air as it evaporates out of the pond. You could have reflected light. There are some areas in Seattle where they have put in really light colored sidewalks, some of the newer sidewalks. There's an area down in Ballard, off Leary Way, was in a substation there. When they put that new sidewalk in, it was bright white, and it actually caused reflection on some of the plants around there. And they were able to put in in that landscape of that substation. They were able to plant small almond trees because it was warm enough. It created a microclimate against a brick building or a stone building with the reflected light. So all these things can help you make choices for where you put things. So become familiar with what's in your own garden. And then of course we want you to pick varieties that are disease and pest resistant, because that means then you won't need to worry about trying to find a product to deal with those pests. You won't have the issue in the first place. And there's lots of things out there. Even in the vegetable world, there are a lot of things. If you have a particular issue that you know you've had, try to look for a variety that's resistant to it. You want to choose plants that are, going to be right for our climate, that aren't going to hate having wet soil if you have a wet garden. You want to have plants that can handle a dry, sandy soil, like some parts of Puget Sound, the areas on the edges of Puget Sound have. You want to have an area or a plant that can handle clay soils if you're in an area where there's a bank of clay. And we can have any variety of soil types in the region. And so knowing what's in your yard will help you make that choice. And having the plant be happy will help you to resist pests and diseases as well. You also want to put it in the right place where it's not getting too much sun, too much shade, and you want to practice some tolerance. So we always recommend that people pay attention to if they have beneficial insects in the garden. And if you do, you want to give it a little bit of time to have an effect, because as in any predator and prey population, the predators take longer to build up their population. So you may have aphids sucking on a rose, and it takes a minute for the lady beetles to move in, or the parasitoid wasps to find them, and that might take a minute. So give it some time, be a little tolerant of some damage until you know. If you don't see anything happening, you want to use chemicals as a last resort. And remember that even the organic products can harm things. Beneficial insects are not immune to the effects of sprays. Even when you're using certified organic products that are made from oils and soaps, they can also be harmed by that spray. And this is a great time of year to take stock of what you have in your garage. Look around and see, do you have products that you've really never used? You used it once and then realized you didn't want to, or it's not a problem in your yard. Do you have some herbicides that you're never going to use again? Maybe you took your lawn out and you have a bunch of weed and feed around. It's a great time to take this stuff to the hazardous waste site. And then, of course, the one that's local to and closest to shoreline is at the Heller Lake site up off Aurora on Stone Avenue. It's very easy to get to. And this time of year, people forget about watering. So there's a few things you still need to be thinking of, though. You need to know that if you're going to put a new plant in, especially a shrub and a tree, that you need to water it well, and you need to keep watering it up to 2 years for it to become established. So even if this is a drought-tolerant plant, it won't be drought-tolerant unless it can develop a root system deep enough to be able to sustain itself. Perennials can take about a year to become established, so same difference there, even if it's drought-tolerant. You can add mulch to help conserve moisture. So mulching after planting is a really good idea. Water it in well, and then get some mulch on there to help keep that moisture in the soil. And then when you're watering, it's always a good rule of thumb to think about watering in the morning and at the base of the plant, because you don't want to get leaves wet that sit there through the night, especially as the weather cools off, because you can increase fungal diseases in plants when you do that. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you're planting under the eaves of a house, you may find that that soil stays very dry, and you might need to supplement water through the winter if the rainfall doesn't hit it. So keep that in mind, that if it's under the eaves, you may need to think about truly drought-tolerant plants there. Get them in the spring, get them adjusted where you're actively watering, and then they can handle a little bit of dry in the winter. Tapering off watering as weather cools is important too, because you don't want to keep encouraging plants to put out a lot of new growth. So you want them to start to go dormant. And sometimes the tapering of water can help, but it's also getting into the rainy season. So we don't want to overwater anyway. So here's all the stuff that we do right now. You know, the leaf raking seems to be sort of the thing people think about in the fall, the main job that we have in the fall. And it is a big job and one of the main ones. We spend a lot of time and energy raking leaves, and we want to encourage you to leave some of them behind, because leaves are a great mulch in the garden, and Reingard's going to go over mulches and how to use them as we get further into the talk. But we're going to talk about this right now because I want you to be thinking about that as she's discussing how mulch works and what is good for mulch. So you can use these currently. You can, if you have a bed where leaves fall in it and it has shrubs and perennials in it, you can let them fall, nestle them in, just rearrange them so it's not smothering a plant, or you don't have like 3 feet of leaves up against a tree. Sometimes you have too many and you need to rake them off. You have them on the lawn, you need to rake them off. So you can bag them up and keep them somewhere for the winter and use them over time. You can feed them back out into the garden. You can put them back out as mulch in the spring. You could put them in a compost system if you have one in your yard. You can share them with neighbors that don't have leaves. I had to go looking for leaves in a house I used to live in because I had mostly conifers in my yard, and I had one small Japanese maple that I got most of my leaves from. So I would kind of go around the neighborhood begging for leaves, which people didn't mind because then I was raking up their leaves off their lawn. So you can help your neighbors out, do them a service. You can also clear some storm drains. You can reuse those leaves provided you're sure they haven't been sitting there too long and they're not too contaminated with runoff from roadways. But they can also be used in areas where you aren't growing food, for instance, or you have a big area that needs a lot of leaves, because a lot of the organic compounds in that will break down. But what are some other reasons why we would use leaves other than, you know, gosh, we can use them as mulch? Well, they can benefit wildlife. A lot of birds actually will scavenge through leaves that have fallen looking for insects that are hiding in there. Some insects hide in there that are beneficial insects, like beetles, like leaf litter and mulch. And black beetles will eat slugs and slug eggs. It can save you money. You're not buying bags to put them in, the paper bags to put them out on the curb. You're not taking them to the transfer station and driving them down there and costing yourself gas money. It stores carbon right on site in the garden, and there's no gas being used for the vehicles that come to pick it all up. And then they really improve soil over time. So all that organic matter breaks down. There's a lot of micronutrients and a lot of great fungal activity that happens when you have leaves. A lot of people store them and make what we call leaf mold, which is a fabulous kind of compost over time that you can break down and use as a soil amendment. If you have diseased leaf material, you want to put that in the yard waste cart and send that away to municipal composting, because their systems get hot enough to destroy any of the fungal organisms that could be problematic. So if you have something like scab on an apple tree, probably best to send those off and not keep them on site. And then, of course, the other thing we think a lot about is tidying things up. So we do want our gardens to look nice, and we want to get in there and trim things off. But I also want you to think about what you can leave and where. Sometimes people make choices where, you know, for curb appeal, they might clean up the front yard more, but in the back where it's just you looking at it, you leave a little bit more deadheading on perennial plants, for instance. This will attract birds into the garden because they like to eat the seeds of these things. So things like Rudbeckia and sunflower, cosmos, echinacea, all those guys, really great bird attracting plants for the seeds. And then you get the benefit of being able to watch the birds out there eating them. You also want to trim out like the dead grass stalks that are happening on things like miscanthus and some of the ornamental grasses. But be sure you're also inspecting hollow stems. because a lot of overwintering solitary bees, they lay their eggs in tubes like this. And so you may have somebody in there already. If you do happen to cut it and notice that, you can just lay it back into the garden, and hopefully, you know, they'll survive the winter, but it's best to leave them intact if you know they're there. And then you do want to prune some dead wood from woody plants. So say you have a lot of dead twigs in the lilac, or even in a rhododendron, in your crabapple tree, or your plum, your purple leaf plum. You want to think about leaving a little bit of that in there. Maybe it's more of an aesthetic choice. You take out the big things and you leave some of the little stuff, because some of that will attract insects to it. And it has sometimes things growing on it that birds will forage on. And so in the winter, you may get a flock of like chickadees coming into the yard looking for food, and they'll kind of scrounge around on deadwood like that. And then if you have vegetable gardens, even if you have in-ground or a raised bed, this is the time of year we always talk about putting them to bed. You want to pull your dead and dying annual plants out. And this would also include in a flower bed or a shrub bed. If you've got plants like, you know, you planted a bunch of geraniums or petunias. Geraniums, some of those you can actually throw into a paper sack, just pull them out bare root, throw them in a paper sack and put them in the garage, and then plant them again next year. And often those will regrow for you. But other things like marigolds, they're kind of done. You might be able to collect a few seeds off of them and start some new ones. You can chop and drop this material, especially in a veggie garden setting. If it's not diseased material, you chop it up and then you can throw some burlap over it and just let it be. And that's all you do for the winter. Like you see in this top picture here, we just put some leaves up under there, and then we also chopped up what was in the bed and left it there in place. All of that decomposes over time. The burlap actually protects the soil. You don't want to leave bare soil because the rain will compact it from falling on it. It will cause it to lose nutrients as the rain washes through the soil, and it'll help. It won't prevent weeds from growing. So keeping the soil bare is a bad idea, and this is one of the simplest ways to cover your soil in the wintertime. But you could think about putting cover crops in instead, or putting in winter crops. Usually we have those in by now and they're growing. But again, as I said, if you can find transplants of things like kale or cabbages, cauliflowers, anything like that, collard greens, you could put those in pretty easily. It's also a good time to think about if you want to do perennial plants, because you could put a lot of perennials in, and things like blueberries, great time to get structure like that into your edible garden. Herbs, a lot of herbs are really little woody shrubs like sage and oregano and lavender. Rosemary is a big woody shrub. Give that lots of room. Rhubarb may be going dormant, but it's a perennial plant, so you can get that in. So lots of things that could be planted. It's a great time to pull up, if you have drip irrigation, to pull up that and soaker hoses and protect those for the winter as well. So chopping and dropping can be used in a lot of fashions. You can use it straight into a veggie bed. You can also use it just as you're weeding in a garden, any kind of garden, even just an ornamental bed. If you have wood chip mulch and a few weeds come up, just pull them and drop them, especially in the summertime when it's hot, because that's going to just dry up and then become organic matter that just fades into the wood chip mulch. But you can prune off anything that isn't diseased and isn't seeded, and actually just drop them in place, and it keeps them handy. You don't have to put it in the compost bin. You don't have to find a bag to put it in. And this works really well for ornamentals as well as the vegetables. Bear in mind that things that have a waxy leaf surface will take a lot longer to break down. And sometimes that's fine, especially in a shrub bed, because you actually then are creating a long-lasting mulch in the garden as well. So if you have a compost bin, this is a great time to do some fall maintenance. You can layer the leaves that you're pulling out of your garden and put them into the compost. If you are still mowing your lawn, you can add some of those last grass clippings as well, because you want a good ratio of green material to brown material. The leaves and the grass clippings together to make good compost. You want to make sure that what you add is disease and insect free, but you can use vegetable plants that you're pulling out. If you decide you want to plant cover crops instead of doing a burlap mulch over it, you can do that. You can actually put cover crops in your raised vegetable bed and then chop up all the veggies you pulled out of the garden and put them into the compost bin now. You want to make sure it's covered. You don't want it to get flooded with water. That will make it become anaerobic if it gets too wet, and it won't function properly and won't compost well. And you want to keep it warmer. If it's time to turn the piles, now is the time to get them turning and start building up the heat as you layer new things into it. If you have a worm bin, sometimes people wrap them with burlap and try to keep them a little bit warmer for the winter. And then now, of course, is a great time to use compost, which Reingard will talk a bit more about, and use it in the garden. But if you're making your own compost, it's a great time to be sifting it and making sure you're using it, because fall is a good time to add it. We're going to talk a little bit about pruning. Pruning is not recommended for the fall in general, major pruning, but there are a few things you can be doing. And one of the reasons we don't recommend pruning right now is because when you prune, you stimulate growth on a plant. And so when you, especially when you do what we call a heading back cut, which is just trimming back a few leaf nodes into the plant to make it bush out more, that's actually stimulating it to grow, and we don't really want to do that right now. It makes the new growth that would come out really susceptible to frost damage, and then once you get damage in the plant, you run the risk of getting more damage further down the stem from different kinds of fungal infections or bacterial infections. Fall drought conditions, if it's a dry fall, can make plants weaker. And so they could be damaged by pruning because, again, you are stimulating growth, and the plant is kind of in a droughty state and then doesn't want to grow as well. And then just in general, as you prune, you are moving through different pieces of the plant, and you could be spreading fungal spores around just by touching the plant, in fact, by shaking it, by touching the leaf and moving on to the next one, by the cuts you make and the pruners themselves. So it's not the best time of year to be doing any real serious pruning, but what we do recommend is to do things like take out any dead limb or dangerous branches. So things that are going to cause safety or property damage issues you want to deal with. Really common thing to do right now is to take a rose like you see in this picture and trim it down a bit, because they get really tall, and when we get a windy day or crazy weather, they can be whipping around and they're going to damage themselves. And then where you get cuts, again, you run the risk of getting disease issues into the stem. If you have a plant like we saw in that tree in the picture just before, right here, that has suckers on it, like at the base here, trim those out. It's fine to do that now. And they might be on the branches, they might be on the root zone, could be anywhere in the plant. You can do the deadwood like we talked about, but leave a little bit of that for birds as well. This is a nice time of year too to start looking at things that you have that are pretty greens that you might want to use to bring in the house for a floral arrangement, or if you make wreaths or swags, things like that. You can trim things from cedar and Doug fir and your pine tree, or from things like sarcoca, even laurel, anything that's a broadleaf evergreen. All those things make great arrangements and are nice to bring inside during the winter time. One of my favorite plants, sarcoca, actually, as you get later into the winter, it starts to get flower buds on it and starts to bloom in early January sometimes, and at least it's ready to bloom. And so I often wait to prune a little bit off of that until I can bring it in while it's blooming, so I can get that scent in my house. You want to prune things that are obstructing something. So if something's overgrowing a walkway and it's making it hard to walk along there, you may need to prune it. Just be aware that if it's something like a rhododendron, we're going to use for next season. And then those dead grass plumes. One of the things about leaving too much of it is that they can blow around and start to get scattered all over the property. But you want to check for those bees before you do that. And you can, as I said, if you do cut them, you can lay them somewhere in a protected area where they can kind of finish their life cycle out. Uh-oh. Hang on, my computer is stuck.
We'll try resharing it. Stopping the share.
Yeah, it's not doing anything for me. Hang on.
Oh no. I can also, I'll pull up the slides here as well.
Why don't you do that? And I will, I may have to, like, my computer completely froze, Cameron.
Oh no. Oh no.
I know,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I'll get your slides pulled up 1 second. While we're doing this, that might be a good time to take a question. All right, bear with us, everybody.
Sorry, folks.
Run this. Okay, I'm going to share screen here. All right, let's see. Zoom through these, all right.
I can't see, I'm still really frozen, so let me see. If I may have to close the computer down and sign back in.
Okay.
Hang on.
So we've got some great questions in the chat, and we'll get to these, here, as we get back up and rolling. But thanks for submitting those. Just give Laura a couple minutes here. Cool, yeah, Rangard, if you want to go ahead and jump in on any of the questions that you see, that would be great.
Can you hear me?
There you are. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. All right, so
Okay.
we got Rangard here to take a couple questions.
I'm like on the phone and the computer, and my computer told me that I'm muted, which I should be, but my phone didn't tell me that I also am muted there.
Right.
So I just want to jump in and take one of the questions real quick. Hello, everybody. Sorry about the technical difficulties we have there. So my name is Rangard. I'm working with Laura, and some of you might have heard me in one of the previous talks already. And I'm going to let her answer the questions that are more that she's more of the expert for. But one question I saw is about being confused between mulch and compost. And since I will be talking about that when Laura is through with her talk, I thought I'll just touch on that real quick. So mulch is basically everything that we put on soil. So it could be, like you've seen plastic sheets, or, of course, we mostly will talk about organic mulches, leaves and wood chips and that sort of thing. But the concept is that mulch is something we put on and on the soil as a layer. And compost is what we are calling when we humans intentionally let a natural process of decomposition happen and encourage that in either a pile of leaf mold or in a compost pile as such. So compost is about the microbial breaking down of organic material, plant material, whereas mulch is really that layer. And so sometimes we use compost as a mulch, and that's where that confusion is coming from. It's a very, but I hope that helps clarify that question.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, just to reiterate, mulch is sort of anything.
Yeah.
It could be a variety of things that you put down to cover the soil, to hold moisture in, kind of do all these things. And it does break down over time. So it could, it is kind of composting a little bit, right? And then you could use an actual compost that you or somebody else has made as a mulch product.
So yes.
Great, awesome, thank you.
And then, yeah.
Was there another question there that you thought you'd like to take at this time?
The other one maybe about the, because I will touch on burlap quite a bit.
Okay, great.
As one of the mulches
awesome.
or layers.
We can wait. It looks like Laura is back. So
yeah.
We can.
Let's go back to that then.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Reingard.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well.
Yeah.
Okay.
People can speak up in chat if they're having trouble.
Okay. I signed back in on my phone because I don't know what that was with my computer and I don't trust it at the moment. And you have the slides. So let's go with that.
Awesome.
All right. So can we go back one slide for a second? Yeah, to here. So like what to prune. So we're talking about things like this rose and pruning out what's too tall. So that next slide then talks about or shows more about fall rose pruning. So one of the things you can do is prune off, as in the top right picture, anything that's dead like that. Now is a good time to get that out of there. And you notice the cut being made close to the next stem that's coming out, the next shoot coming out, but not right on top of it. You don't want to damage that growth at the base of that. Get out those moldy flowers. If anything's trying to die back, you can get a lot of diseases in there. Botrytis is one of those diseases that likes the moldy flower. You might see that on pansies this time of year. And then clean up all those dead leaves like the black spot leaves that are on the base, because that will just keep spreading as well. But clean up around roses. It's really good and helpful. And then this top left picture is an example of trimming back some of those long, tall stalks so that they're not whipping around. Okay, and then the next one I think is about suckers.
Okay. There you go.
So pruning the suckers, these could be water sprouts that are on top of the tree branches or the suckers at the base of the tree. And this fabulous graphic that we have here on the bottom shows you the difference between them. But any of that can be cut out of there. The picture that I showed you originally of the tree with the suckers at the base of it. And then this is just showing like somebody taking a long pair of loppers and trimming it out. You want to make sure your pruners are sharp right now when you're making these cuts. You want nice clean cuts that aren't going to rip into the bark or tear anything. Again, you don't want to be introducing any diseases. Okay. So this is a great time of year to sort of evaluate how the wildlife is in your garden. What kind of wildlife do you have? Who are you hoping to attract? What can you do to make that different? Because you can make your choices by what you plant now. If you want to bring in things like birds to the garden, they are great beneficial creatures to have to help with insect control. They actually will comb a tree all winter long. Chickadees love to eat insects. They eat seeds too, but they forage for insects. Hummingbirds are looking for flowers that can have some kind of nectar in them. So there's very little in the wintertime, but you could be pre-planning to get things planted, like the mahonia or the red flowering currant. that you see in the bottom picture there. Those are great foods for the Anna's hummingbirds that overwinter here. Remember that, you know, we want you to tidy up, but we also want you to be aware of things like twigs and leaves and spider silk, and, you know, don't destroy all the spiders. They're actually catching insects. But in the spring, hummingbirds use moss and spider silk to make their nests. So you want to have these materials present. Think of it as when you try to attract wildlife to the garden, you're building habitat, and you need to have the building materials that they need to create their homes and their nests with. If you are lucky enough to have something like an old snag that's safely, you know, far away from your house, it's a great place for birds that are cavity nesters. Grassy areas can be useful sites for things like the juncos that are ground nesters. If you do have artificial birdhouses, now's the time of year to make sure you get those cleaned out, because nobody's nesting right now, and you want to make sure all the materials are out of them and fresh and clean for when the birds nest next spring. And then if you do use bird feeders, make sure you keep those clean, and keep them clean while you're using them. Be sure you bring them in periodically. With my hummingbird feeders, I try to wash them every time they empty, and I usually in the winter keep 2 around, because if it gets frosty, they freeze up pretty easily. So I'll put one out, and then as it freezes, I'll put the next one out, and I'll just keep washing them. And remember that native fauna recognizes native flora, so use native plants in the garden to attract more birds to it. Okay. We have a lot of native bees. We, you know, tend to think about honeybees as the bee in the, you know, garden, but honeybees are not native here, though a lot of people have hives, and they're a great bee to have around too. We have a lot of solitary native bees, and we have a couple that are very common, like the leafcutter and the mason bee. They are both tube nesting bees. They actually put their eggs in a tube, build a wall, put another egg. And as they're doing that, they're laying a pollen pile next to it, and they use material from the garden. Mason bee uses mud, which is why they're called a mason bee, and the leaf cutter obviously cuts holes out of your leaves. So this is where you need to be a little tolerant as well. They're both great pollinators, and they're important creatures to have in the garden. You can actually rent these from folks and have them take care of them. But if you have tubes that you are hosting for yourself and you are maintaining little artificial boxes for them, you need to make sure you're cleaning them out in the fall, because they could get mites on the cocoons. The cocoons are going to overwinter until time for them to emerge, and they spend a lot of their time in these little tubes. Most of their lives are spent in there. They are active in different seasons, depends. The leaf cutters in the summer and mason bee more in the spring to early summer. And then they're very versatile pollinators. They fly in, especially mason bees will fly earlier in the spring in cooler, cloudier weather. They're important pollinators for food gardens, fruit trees and tomatoes, blueberries, things like that. Bumblebees in particular are our main tomato and blueberry pollinator. And in Seattle, they did a study, a couple of UW students, a botanist and an entomologist did a study where they found that the yellow-faced bumblebee was the most common tomato pollinator. These guys are ground nesters. So this is an area where if you are mulching, you want to know if there's a nest. You don't want to completely bury its opening. You want to be aware where they are. And this time of year, the queen is looking for a dry slope to overwinter in. So you want to protect her as well. Bumblebees are great. They come out pretty early. And when you're choosing plants to have in the garden now, good thing to think about is early bloomers, because these guys need food when they start emerging. There is a project called the Pollinator Pathway that Sarah Bergman created. And this is her brainchild to think about sort of more systems thinking about our landscapes and how we have, with urbanization, kind of chunk things up so that we don't have contiguous landscapes anymore. And so she created this project connecting 2 different spots in Seattle
with gardens in between them. And so they go from Seattle University down to Nora's Woods, which is down in Madrona. These are actually parking strips, but these are examples of what you can do in a parking strip or in your own garden, the kind of plants you can pull in, especially to encourage pollinators, but also birds would love these plants too. If you're encouraging birds, of course, you want a little more diversity in scale and some more shrubbery and things like that. But this is a great place to walk and get ideas. Come into Seattle, take a walk down the Pollinator Pathway. It's a great, it's only like a mile long walk to take. But there's some fun examples along there. That's on Capitol Hill. Here's some examples of the different scale and types of plants. So deciduous, evergreen, ground cover, shrub, perennial, going up into big trees. Depending on the scale of your yard, you may only be able to get into small scale trees, but you know, the different scales are different niches for different kinds of birds and wildlife. So having more diversity will bring in more diverse wildlife as well. And then winterizing. It's important to think about all the things you need to do to protect your garden and all your garden tools, including your outside water faucet, and making sure if you have a separate turn off for that water that you do turn it off. You turn off your sprinklers, you drain them out, drain and roll up your hoses. Store those inside. Don't leave them out where they're gonna like freeze and thaw all winter long. Your drip irrigation. If you have soaker hoses in the ground, you can leave them if you don't want to pull them up. You just want to make sure they're mulched over really well so that they're protected. And then don't forget about your potted plants. Those guys can freeze. They're above ground and that's a small volume of soil. They're not protected. So they're much more vulnerable to freezing and thawing. So you want to keep them, make sure that they're watered. You can mulch plants that are in them. And some people will wrap burlap around them to help. It's not always necessary. Thinking about what you put in those pots that can overwinter and handle that cold soil can help. And then again, check under the eaves of your house for plants. And then prepare your garden for songbird needs. This photograph is actually a very, very snowy winter at my old house in Wedgwood when there was a little hummingbird at the feeder. And again, I would rotate those out as they froze and keep them going. And then now it's Reingard's turn. She's going to tell you all about how to get your soil healthy this time of year.
Awesome. And Reingard, I did just mute you again. Apologies. So you have to unmute yourself. There you are.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep, gotcha.
So that's like with two different screens. So yes, mulch and soil amendments and compost. And if you want to proceed the slides, that would be great. I'm going to start talking about mulch. So like I said earlier, as we had a little bit of time while Laura was dealing with the technical issues, mulch is a layer of material on the surface that we put down on the surface of our soil. And usually it's made up of an organic material, but it could be plastic, for example. We know that plastic mulches are around, right? Sometimes people use like paper also that is specifically bought for that purpose. But there's all these materials that we have available and that for the most part are free. So we can definitely do that and use those. Leaves are, Laura was touching on that already. Leaves are a great way to create a mulch. And it's I would say about the most natural one, right? I mean, at this time of the year, deciduous trees fall to the ground, and that's where they would stay if we don't do anything. So, you know, use them. We definitely want to rake them up, you know, up from lawns if we want to have a lawn area, because otherwise the grass blades will get crushed at some point. But useful from tree leaves in the garden. And this image right there is one wonderful example of how you could do that. in my own garden, actually, my garlic bed kind of looks like that right now. I really put a thick layer of leaves on that. And then come spraying all the garlic, it's just shooting through there. Definitely avoid any material, any leaves that are diseased, a disease that you don't want to, perpetuate. Definitely should not be brought back on there. Or some tree leaves actually have a growth inhibiting effect on others. So on other plants, so you don't want to put those down necessarily as well. And that would be, for example, black walnut is kind of common around here. Horse chestnuts sometimes as well. So those you might want to just send off to the city and send them to the regular yard waste collection. Another kind of mulch that we like to use is wood chips. They're of course much heavier and chunkier than leaves are. So you want to put them and use them in places that is desired. You wouldn't want to put your wood chips necessarily on or certainly not a thick layer of wood chips on your vegetable garden bed, right? But if you want to, if you have an area with a big weed issue, for example, and you want to use that would be great. I have an area in my own front yard right now where I decided that I didn't want to have the lawn that was really not doing well anyhow because it was baked in the sun too much. And it's never been a really good, soil there. So I just put a layer of cardboard there and put a really thick layer of wood chips, and it's just coming along beautifully. And so this is going to turn into a perennial planting area, and wood chips are just perfect for that purpose. If you do, like I mentioned already, they're not great for veggies, and also not, if you have an annual flower bed, then wood chips might not also not be the most logical choice. Grass clippings. Well, we have conifer needles on that list next. So if you have a garden where you have like evergreen trees and conifer needles are a natural thing that drops. Under those, you can definitely leave them. They would feed the tree what it's dropping, so that's definitely a desired thing. And so that will be one way to mulch under your trees and in your evergreen areas. And if you have tree branches drop, then you can pick those up and make, like Laura was suggesting earlier, use them in your holiday decoration. Don't send them off. Grass clippings. We might have one more time to mow, but grass clippings are usually more of a spring and summertime thing, early summer especially. But they are wonderful mulch. They, we definitely want to make sure that they're pesticide-free, but they're wonderful to add nitrogen. You want to pick them up and drop them very loosely. Don't put them down too thickly because otherwise they can mat up. I kind of like sprinkle them on. And they break down really quickly and they add nitrogen, so they're great in your vegetable or annual flower beds. And then cover crops, we'll get to that a little later again, but cover crops are what we call a living mulch. So those will be a way to mulch as well. Then our sawdust and manure blends that we can purchase. They kind of look tidy, they kind of give it this landscaped, intentional look. But they can also mat up and they can get really heavy. Sawdust can really compact, especially in the rains that we get around here. And at the same time, then when they dry out on the surface, they can actually repel water. So they are not always a great choice. Plus, it's usually something that we would spend money on. So there could be better opportunities, better options. Bark is also something that's oftentimes, available for purchase. And it's also, of course, one of the jobs of bark on a on the tree is to repel water. It's doing all kinds of other things too, but it protects the tree. And so it's also not as nutritious as other options. So bark, especially beauty barks, we tend to avoid. We prefer not to use it as much. Beauty bark that is dyed is especially, you know, or rubber mulches even. Let's just use other options. And then at the bottom of this list, you know, like we're listing straw and burlap and cardboard and compost. Those are all options that are available for free. Straw is great. You probably heard about straw gardens even. It breaks down as well. It insulates very well because it's, you know, all the air that's in it. So straw is a wonderful option. And burlap is something that came up already, I saw in the Q&A. So burlap is great. Laura showed an image of burlap sacks on a garden bed. It's a great insulator. It is a natural material that breaks down very nicely, very, very slowly. I don't know if you noticed that in the image that Laura was showing earlier. There was actually some leaves underneath the burlap. So if you put leaves on a vegetable bed, for example, or your deciduous leaves, like in this image, and you put burlap on top, then you can prevent the leaves from flying away, especially if you have an exposed or more exposed area. Cardboard is one of my favorites. Laura knows that I'm always asking for cardboard all over because it's great it's a great basis under other mulches. And it's wonderful for suppressing weeds, so it's a great option as well. And then we'll get to compost. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. Let's move forward to the next one. So mulches, like one of the reasons, or the many reasons why we're using mulch, because they insulate, the insulating effect, you know, like all those air pockets and all that, they moderate the soil temperature. They insulate from the cold in the winter, but they also do the same with the heat in the summer. They prevent weeds from popping up and coming through. They conserve moisture. They also supply nutrients, some more than others. Grass clippings are high in nutrient, in, you know, nitrogen, for example, and like we said, bark has very, very little. Mulches do a couple other things for us. They just protect the soil all around. If we step on a mulched bed, we do less damage and compaction. And also it helps the soil lose less nutrients through erosion, for example. And it gives it, you know, it looks tidy, like we see in this picture. You know, it looks nice. So mulch is definitely a nice thing. Let's go to the next slide. These are a couple more examples. I already touched on most of those, so I'm going to skip on some of that text there. But there's all these different types of mulches, and essentially, just to recap what I was saying earlier, if you match the mulch to your needs, then you know you'll be the most successful. And like we said, leaves, especially this time of the year, are just the best. But compost is a great mulch. We'll get to that soon. And you know, wood chips for perennials, and sheet mulching we'll cover in a dedicated slide as well. So the next thing that's great about a lot of these mulches that we're mentioning is you can get them for free. You can use, of course, all the materials that you happen to have in your own garden, or you can ask your neighbors. Like Laura was saying that, you know, in the previous place she lived in, she was asking her neighbors to rake up their leaves and take them. That's a win-win situation right there. And of course, you can do it the other way around too. If you happen to have more leaves, or you know, than you want, or more grass clippings than you want to deal with, then you know, offer them up to your neighbors. They might want to take that. Okay, I'm seeing the slides out of order, so I'm just gonna keep talking about all the links you can get it for free. If you have more leaves, then you can use store them in bags, like Laura was mentioning already too. One thing that we didn't talk about yet, and that, I know that was a question in the Q&A, I'm going to get to that now, and that is stop and drop, because it's definitely also something that is free in our own garden. If you do that, I think the question was about which tools to use. And essentially, you know, it depends on what you're using for pruning your plants. You do want to kind of chop it down into smaller chunks. I have a willow tree in my garden, and I let it always drops branches, and I let those be. But you know, just today I was going out in my garden for lunch break, and took an area where I had the branches from last year, and they didn't break down yet, and I didn't cut them. If I would have cut them into like a couple inch longest chunks, that would be much more useful for using as a mulch. Or just, you know, chop and drop right there in place. Coffee grounds are another thing that we can get for free easily. You know, if we drink coffee ourselves, it can add up, especially if a couple people in a household drinking coffee. You end up with a good amount of it. You can use coffee grounds for composting, of course, but you can also mix it in your soil, and you can use it as a mulch if you want to. But it does cost up a little bit. So if you have an area around the plant where you really want to kind of suppress weeds and at the same time add nutrients, you might want to do that. Keep it away right from the stem, but that's an option. And burlap is also available from coffee roasters, the burlap sacks. You can also purchase it. That's a fairly new thing. It used to be that's just not even a possibility, but some businesses are buying up burlap sacks now from coffee roasters. So if you Google it, you'll find places that sell it. I've definitely seen that available in our area. And one question that came up also already for Q&A was about, you know, heavy leaves. Is it okay, and how would you do that if you have like leaves from, you know, a cherry laurel or English laurel or maybe a Pacific madrone? And I would say that, you know, it depends on what you want to achieve. If this is a plant that is in like a naturalized area, I would leave it, because that's what the trees would do. The plants would do by themselves as well. So that's an option for sure. Evergreen and especially these waxy kind of leaves definitely take a long time to break down. So if you don't want to have that, you know, there for looks, for example, or because it's on a walkway, then you know, you might want to remove it and either bag it up, or, you know, maybe you have a corner in your backyard where you can just let them sit there for a long time. And by that I mean like a couple years. Or another option for those types of materials is actually sending them through a chipper. So that's an option as well. And another free opportunity, although that can take a long time to receive the materials, but we have a lot of arborists here who share their wood chips from their projects through a service called Tip Drop. The link is right there on the slide. So you can put your name on that, and at some point you will get a call, and they will share their arborist chips with you. That can be, it's a very popular service by now, so that can be a couple months or more of wait time. But if that is something that you know, you can do and you have time to wait for, then that will be a way to get some free materials as well. So let's jump to the next slide. So the next slide will talk about sheet mulching and how to remove lawns and weeds. This is, you know, I touched on that earlier already. This is what we call sheet mulching. you can put newspaper or cardboard just on your lawn if you want to, or on your weeds, on your weedy area as well. And then put a thick layer of wood chips on that, like shown in that left bottom corner in that image. That will you know, the grassy material, the lawn underneath will start breaking down. You'll get a big layer of organic matter, material there, and you can transform your that area into something else for planting shrubs or something, for example. And just a note, actually, that newspaper takes longer to break down than cardboard. That's kind of counterintuitive, but that happens to be the case. If you have, like one person was asking in the Q&A, if you have bindweed and buttercup to deal with, then you really want to lay it on thick. You need to add lots of layers of, and I mean, like, 4 or 5 layers of cardboard would be a good idea. And then put a lot of wood chips there on top of that. And with buttercups, it's similar. Buttercups are easier to pull up, actually, than, bindweed is really hard to remove. But if I have a trouble area, actually I do have in my garden, where I live right now, where those two things are present, then that would be a good approach. Definitely you want to put a couple or more layers of cardboard, like 4 or 5 thick. And you want to be sure that the cardboard overlaps so that there is no, especially the bindweed will find a way to like sneak through there. So you want to make sure that the cardboard that is as big as possible, the pieces, the individual pieces, and that you overlap them really good. And also please take off the tape if you have any cardboard boxes with tape on it, because otherwise you'll find that later on when you pull weeds. Yeah, newspapers are actually harder and harder to get these days, because we're all doing everything online. You might want to ask the neighbors who are getting the paper, and in addition to your own, to collect that. So that's, yeah. Let's talk about the next slide. That's, living mulches. Laura was mentioning that already earlier as well. Cover crops are a form of mulch, living mulch. Cover crops are a great way to achieve a couple of different things all at the same time. They do protect the soil from the rain, especially, the pounding is just buffered by the physical presence. They protect from nutrient loss because the soil is held by their roots. In addition to that, some cover crops especially actually add nutrients. When they're turned in, like the cover crops in this image right there, they have been turned in come spring. And so all this great, organic matter and the nutrients in these greens were turned into the soil and made available that way for the plants that were planted after that. Another thing that these cover crops are doing is, like especially the ones with that are from the legume family, they add microorganisms and nitrogen into the soil. And some of the cover crops can actually, if you let them bloom and start flowering in the spring, they will also attract early pollinators, which can be beneficial as well to your garden. And they're a great way to use in the garden bed where you want to improve the soil in. Like that's one way to do that, and it's a very beautiful way. Let's jump to the next slide. There's a basic. Cover crops are basically the ones that we're using. Cover crops, I think the concept comes from agriculture, really. So there's 2 main groups of cover crops that we're using. Some are the cereal grasses. Winter wheat is a common one. Annual rye is used a lot around here. and then oats and a couple different other different cereals as well. They really do a good job holding the soil. They also provide structure. They're more fibrous when you do cut them back and bring them and turn them into the soil. Then they provide more like physical structure. And I think one of the resources that Cameron will share with you later has a link to a video that shows in detail how this is done by one of our coworkers. And so oftentimes what we do is we use these, they're shown individually in these photos, but oftentimes you can buy a mix of cereal, a cover crop mix of a cereal grass and a legume. So let's jump to the next slide. And in that case, the grasses are going to provide support, like physical support for the legume plants to go up on or in between. The one thing with the rye to keep in mind is that if you're waiting too long in spring and it's starting to turn yellowish, it gets a little bit on fibrous, so it can become a little bit harder to cut it basically, because then you're gonna end up with something that's more like a straw structure. So you don't want to wait that long. The cover crops, the legume type, the legumes that we're using for cover crops, they are basically doing two jobs for us. The one is that, they cover everything, of course, and then also the second piece that they do that the cereals don't is that they have this in the rhizobial bacteria in those little modes. I don't know if you can see that on the slide in the bottom picture. If you ever pull up a pea plant or bean, for example, or veg, you'll see those little bubbles on the roots, on the smaller roots, and that's where these bacteria are living in, and they are the ones that are turning nitrogen into. They're fixing the nitrogen into those little nodes, and then that will become available to the plants that you are going to plant after that. If you're turning the cover crops in, if you pull this up and you throw it into the yard waste, you're sending all the nitrogen with it. So you really want to turn them into that soil. The next image shows working with cover crops, and the left one is a still from that video that I just mentioned. It's called Winter Mulching and Cover Crops in the Garden. So if you want to look at that, that's a great video to show exactly how to do that, all the steps. And on the right one, you see one of my coworkers, and as she in the spring is then is the very same bed that she is actually making those little rolls of the cover crop, and she's rolling it up in those little areas in between. That's where she planted the next crop of vegetables. So with all that, let's jump to a totally different topic real quick. Something that we can also do in the fall, and that is soil testing. It's a great time to test the soil if you haven't done that yet. This photo shows how someone's collecting soil and putting it into a bag to be sent to the laboratory. And soil testing is really a very useful tool in our repertoire as gardeners, because it tells us what we're dealing with. It tells us what kind of soil we have, and that helps us with a lot of things. It helps us understand our soil better and know what nutrient level we have, for example. Do we need to add fertilizer? Do we actually not need to add fertilizer? Oftentimes that's the case. And we really don't want to add more fertilizer than necessary, especially not chemical fertilizer, because that would actually contaminate our soil and then down, our surface and groundwater, and then our lakes and also push it out potentially. soil testing helps us understand what conditions our soil is in. Is it acid? And if that's the case, then you know, depending on what we want to do, we might want to choose acid, you know, soil loving plants, or we might want to change that. And knowing what our soil is actually like will help us understand what we you know, it will help save money in a way, because we will be able to purchase less fertilizer and other items. Even if we add manure, for example, as a fertilizer, we can cut down on that. If we have a house that is, or live in a house that is built before 1978, which a lot of us around here do, or if our house was, or our backyard was on an old orchard site, certainly industrial sites, or also, you know, if we live along a busy highway, and some of us further south especially will be affected by the shelter plumes from Tacoma, then we definitely want to test. And our next slide actually has a good link to what to a free resource, and that is the King Conservation District. We will be they offer 5 free soil tests per household for all King County residents. So that's 5 free tests that you can take, and they also have a great video to show how to do it, what to send them, and then if you end up getting the results back and you have questions, they do send you the results with recommendations. But if that is still not clear, then you can always call the garden hotline, and my co-workers will be happy to help you figure out exactly what the best solution is for your particular garden and situation. So one test that you can do yourself is the so-called char test. That I think is, first of all, it's a lot of fun actually to do that, and this King Conservation District website has a detailed video on that one as well. But essentially, you take a mason jar and you fill it with garden soil from you know, soil from your garden, the site that you want to test, and then you add water. And they're saying in their instructions a teaspoon. I think just a couple drops of dish soap might be enough. You shake it really hard, and then you just let it sit. And I actually have my jar. If I would be able to share my screen with you all, I would show you. I have my jar from 4 years ago still sitting at my on my big bookshelf here with me. And it's really interesting because oftentimes we think we have a kind of soil that we don't. Like when I moved to the place I'm living in now, I thought I had heavy clay. And it turned out that that wasn't quite the case in much of my garden. It was in one spot, but the rest of it was just so compacted that I drew a completely wrong conclusion until I actually did that test. And so I'm having much sandier soil than I thought, which affects how I, you know, like what I can do and how I will treat my garden. So the next slide, amending our soil. That's something that, you know, we've talked about already earlier as well. And this is a good time of year to do that. And one thing that, you know, in addition to the mulches I've already touched on, is of course compost. So it's okay to jump to the next slide. So compost, that was a question earlier, and just to review that again, compost is plant material that is broken down biologically in the process of oxygen. It's something that we do intentionally, a process that nature just automatically does, right? And some of us call it farming microbes. That's the way to refer to it as well. Essentially, when we create a compost pile, we make, you know, we speed up this process oftentimes by creating just the ideal conditions for this. And the product that we're getting is wonderful organic matter that is rich in microbes and other soil-dwelling creatures that we want to have in our garden. So we can use compost in our garden. Let's go to the next slide. This slide actually shows us just how much you would put on. If you have clay soils and you want to add compost as a soil amendment right now, for example, you will put about an inch on your lawns, but then with lawn, you really want to rake it in, Rich. I would actually do less than this, more like what they're saying here for the top dressing. If you're establishing a new garden, a 2-inch layer is not too much, and then you want to add about an inch every year. If you have sandy soil, you want to do a little bit more. You can definitely put 3 inches on a very sandy soil at the, as you're starting to establish a new garden bed or a new area, and you want to add compost when you plant new plants, and definitely in the fall is a good time to add compost. It helps absorb the water and hold it back a little bit, so it wouldn't run off as quickly. It also softens the impact on the raindrops. Like the weather we had earlier today, like those hail pellets. The layer of soft compost is going to absorb that much better than just exposed compacted soil, for example. And so fall is definitely a great time to add that. And in the long run, it'll improve your soil structure. It provides micronutrients in a very balanced way. Compost also actually manages to moderate your soil pH. So if you have soil that is too basic, it'll make it more neutral. If you have soil that's more acid, it will also bring it to the more neutral range. And if you have heavy metals, for example, it can actually help detoxify that. It can hold that. It definitely protects against pests and plant diseases as well. It makes the whole system just more resilient because of the nutrients and the beneficial, microorganisms and not so microorganisms that it adds. And if you're using compost that you built at home, then it would also, reduce waste and save your money. So, but you can also add other investments. Before applying anything that we're going to see on the next slide, I suggest that you make sure that you have a soil test and have an idea of what you actually need. There's a lot of, you go to any garden store, there's a lot of seed meals and such out in the market, and all kinds of soil material and soil amendments and improvements sold to us. But do we really need them? A soil test will tell us that. If you do want to add something, or if you find that you do need to add something, seed meals are a great choice. Okay, I just lost the connection on my screen. I will keep talking. I hope that's okay.
That's
seed
okay.
meals
Just
are a
tell
great
me when to
choice.
switch.
Okay. Yeah, this one will take a little while, so maybe it'll come back.
All good.
They range from 3 to about 7% nitrogen, depending on whether you're using alfalfa, cotton meal, or flax, or soy. They can definitely be useful, but be aware that insecticides can accumulate in those seed meals, which are just the outer layer of seed that has been harvested. Fruit pomaces, it's a little late already, I guess, for apple, if you're making apple cider, that sort of thing. You want to compost those things first before you apply them. And sometimes, especially with apples around here, with the apple maggots, we want to send that through the city composting system to not increase that, the apple maggot population here. Coffee grounds, if you can get a hold of, let's say if you own, I would also send them through the compost, but you
Reingard, looks like you just got muted. You could try unmuting yourself. There you are.
Okay, that is very strange because like I didn't touch my phone, but okay. So what was the last thing you all heard? Did we hear about talk about coffee grounds already?
Coffee grounds, I believe, was the last thing.
Okay, yes. So coffee grounds are just the best. They are basically, if you're looking at what when you're making compost, what you're looking for, coffee grounds has the exact perfect mix for that already. So it's a very well balanced soil amendment or composting ingredient. I would compost it first for sure. I put all my coffee grounds, or actually my roommate's coffee grounds, because I'm not drinking it anymore, into my compost. Also, if you happen to have a worm bin, the red wiggler worms that we're using in there, they love coffee grounds. It's just, they can basically just live on coffee grounds. But you can apply it directly to the soil or mix it in with another mulch if you really want to do that. Blood meal is something that is also used a lot and offered a lot in any gardening store. You'll get that. It's very concentrated. It can actually encourage like fungal growth, just by the very nature of what it is. It can burn plants, but it also seems to have the effect of repelling some critters that we don't want, so like larger ones. So use it with caution. And again, it's something that I would like only apply if I find that I really need to use a lot of nitrogen, add a lot of nitrogen based on a soil test. Feather meal, fish meal is somewhat similar. Feather meal, of course, breaks down really slowly. Fish meal is more popular for a good reason. It's quite expensive though, so keep that in mind. And then there's something called, biosolids, or also referred to sewer sludge. Our local supplier here is Loop. And this is something that people oftentimes have reservations about. They're concerned about maybe there's heavy metals in it or other chemicals. And this is actually a product that is very well tested. They test frequently. They test all their batches. It's heavily controlled. And it's the concerns that many people have about biosolids are actually because of where it's coming from, the sewage system. But those like substances like antidepressants or material, chemicals like that. If we wouldn't use them in this way, they would end up in our waterways, where they're actually a much bigger problem, because there's no way for them to be broken down. And so using these materials and bringing them back to where they should be, like back into soil, is actually a safe and a good approach. One example that I heard is that the lab test is that if you're taking aspirin and you're concerned about that ending up in the sewer system and then going into back on through the biosolids back onto your soil, you would actually like literally need to eat 2 trucks full of the biosolid material before you would have the concentration of just like one daily dose of your aspirin. So it's really not an issue. Come on, my computer's telling me that I'm muted again. Am I fine?
You're fine. Yep, you're still going.
Okay.
I think so. It seems to just lost you again.
I think she wanted me to take this section on
Okay.
anyway.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Go for it.
So we wanted to show you some areas where you can find some of the things we've been talking about. Obviously, as we've been talking a lot about mulch and soil and compost and soil amendments, this is a great time of year to be getting those into the garden. Pacific Topsoils is one of those sites where you can find those things. This is just sort of a generic list of what they have listed on their website with a little bit of explanation about what they are. Pacific Garden Mulch and Screened Compost Mulch are both called mulches. And I know there's confusion often about the mulch compost, what's compost, which hopefully we've talked you through some of that tonight. The yard waste compost coming from Pacific Garden Mulch is really, this is a compost product. So you want to think of this more as something that you would dig into soil. You can layer it on top if you want to, but it's not the same type of mulch as something like a wood chip mulch would be. And then the screened compost mulch is actually a product that's made from sawdust and manure that's been composted down. And it is a more kind of formal mulch, maybe a finer texture than wood chip. People use this when they have concerns about the aesthetics of wood chips. One thing you want to be aware about products like this is that they can cake up and get kind of hard. And so you may have trouble getting water through them. Sometimes it's good to just use thinner layers of this in areas where you want the aesthetic look of it. But Pacific Topsoils has a lot of great products. They have a lot of different kinds of soils as well. Okay. Sky Nursery, obviously, a shoreline favorite, my favorite. I live in West Seattle, but I still will drive to Sky Nursery because I love that. I love to shop there. So they have a ton of bagged amendments, all the things that Reingard was talking about, all the different kinds of what we would call a single element amendment, like blood meal all by itself or bone meal by itself. Fertilizer mixes, you can get different things with different mixes in them already made together. Often the fertilizers that they sell actually have those kind of components in them as the fertilizing element. Lots of different kinds of bagged potting soils and composts and mulches. You can also get bulk compost and wood chips there. So that's easy. If you have a truck, way to move a bigger amount, you're going to get a better price for it. Also, Sky Nursery, lovely nursery that it is, has lots of plants. So they're going to be selling you things that are appropriate to plant at this time of year. So that's another nice way to go get ideas. And then if you are buying trees and shrubs, as I mentioned, you want to make sure to look and see what size they're really going to get to. And then they sell cover crop seed. So here's one place you can find that. The next one. Home Depot also will have many of these same things. So they have a ton of bagged amendments as well. And then they also do sell some bulk soil, which I've never tried. So I'm not sure what that is and where it comes from. And it varies by region. So you have to, I think, order that online. And they have bulk mulch as well. And they do the wood chip mulch. And they have like the play chip type products. But they also sell cover crop seeds. And they also sell plants. I got all of my pansies that I have on my front porch from Home Depot this year. And then I'll go ahead with this one. And then Reingard, I'll let you come back in if you're ready. We have a lot of useful tools that we want to recommend to you. This is a slide that covers basically all the kind of tasks we've been talking about, the different kinds of rakes that you'll find useful, rakes to move soil around, like the bow rake on the far right, the lawn leaf rake, which is the red plastic type that takes leaves off the lawn much easier. And then the steel, the metal leaf rakes are useful in garden shrub beds. You can get a little more finesse because they're flexible to get around plants. Different kinds of shovels have different uses, a digging shovel versus a scooping shovel, different kinds of pruning implements, a scythe to cut tall things down like your grasses if you've inspected them for bees. And then the different forks. You got a pitchfork and a garden fork as well. Pitchforks are good for moving materials, and garden forks are good for working in the soil. And they do less damage than a shovel will do in the soil. Okay. All right, I guess we're at the end anyway. So this is just a set of resources. There's a resource sheet too that we gave to Cameron, which lists these and a few more things. I was running out of room on the screen to add them. I want to point out that this photograph is actually the Bellevue Botanic Gardens. That's a fabulous site to just go look around, and they have wonderful plants in different kinds of settings to get ideas from. And they have that scale of large tree to ground cover range of materials as well. And that's what we got for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I do just want to acknowledge that we are running pretty late here. So thanks for sticking with us through the technical difficulties. I'm going to really quick launch the compost raffle. Again, this is for shoreline residents only. So if you are interested, just take a minute and submit. You don't have to submit if you're not interested, but if you are, just please check the box for yes, and I'll announce that winner tomorrow. And then let's go ahead and dive into some questions while people are voting there. I'll give you a couple minutes to vote and or to submit. So the first question here for either one, we'll do the voted ones and then maybe some plant questions and then some miscellaneous ones. So Kay is asking if her hydrangea bush is too heavy and bent over, can I prune it? Maybe just timing for hydrangeas.
Hydrangeas are one of those, there are different types that bloom a little differently, but generally you can prune them whenever you want. If you prune them too late in the season, you could lose flowers off of them. Often they have set their flower buds late in the summer. But if you need to do it because it's bending, the plant is bending and it's going to disfigure the plant, you can go ahead and do it. You may lose a few flowers off of it, but often there are enough flower buds on there, you'll still get a bloom out of it.
Awesome, thank you. Is frost, Jesse's wondering if frost is harmful for a newly seeded lawn.
It can be. It depends on how big those little grass plants are and whether they've developed a good root system yet. I doubt that we're going to get any heavy frosts right now, unless you are living a little further up into the foothills of the Cascades. We're probably still fairly safe, even though it's going to get kind of chilly this week. It'll be warmer during the day, which will help. It's not like a hard frost all day long would be the thing to worry about.
Awesome. And then kind of piggybacking on that, another lawn question. Harriet had her lawn aerated yesterday. What is the next step? Fertilizer, seeding, or compost? So the ordering of those and if it's too late to overseed or not.
It's not too late. It is a little bit of a risk, but the first thing I would do is get some compost down on it. If you are going to fertilize, just get a good organic fertilizer that's a slow release fertilizer so that you aren't trying to push anything too hard right now. Grass will grow in cooler weather, as I mentioned, but you want to temper that with not, trying to really push it right now. September, early October is the best time to get your lawn fertilized. But if you have, just aerated and you want to do the series, go ahead. So if you are going to fertilize, put a little fertilizer down, put the compost down over that or some kind of soil to top dress. You want that to fall into the holes where the aeration has happened because that gets the soil into the soil profile so it can start working, doing its magic. And then if you're going to overseed, then you would put a little seed down. Then you would put a very slim layer of something over that to protect it from wind, from birds, from drying out.
Could you use a compost for that, or just straw even?
I would just use the compost.
Compost.
Again,
Okay.
just
Perfect.
have whatever material you use as a top dressing, use as what you're going to put over the seed. You don't want to create too many profiles there, even in a slim layer like that, that can impede water from moving through it.
Awesome, thank you. So our next question is from Ellen. Will burlap over garden kill off the perennials and bulbs over winter?
I wouldn't put burlap over things that have growing points that are going to be coming up in the spring. You want to put this over bare soil or around plants. You could, if you know where the bulbs are, you need to be checking for them about the time you think they should be coming up. And you want to be careful, because when they are really insulated, like I've done this with leaf layers that I've left in shrub beds, and then I raked out a bit too much, and then all of a sudden there were bulbs already coming up. They come up earlier because it's warmer under the burlap or under the leaves. So you need to leave them protected until it's really time for them to grow. But ideally, you should use some kind of leaf material or something that they can grow through rather than a burlap that would hamper them a little bit.
Awesome, thanks. And I am gonna close this compost raffle here in 5 seconds. So if you haven't and you want to, please do that. Next question is, well, we kind of answered this. We talked about where to purchase burlap. So it sounds like there's, local coffee roasters or coffee shops you can ask, and then just doing a Google search for buying burlap. Any other tips to add, either of you?
There's
No, I think
called Seattle Burlap, but they go collect them from coffee shops and then sell them to you.
Reingard, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's, it's going to be harder to find them because people are finally picking up on what wonderful roasters they are. So, find your neighborhood coffee roaster and make them your friend.
Awesome. And we did have somebody share a tip from Cascade Roasters up in Everett. So
nice.
Next question, is it okay to use straw for a cover on a vegetable garden?
Reingard?
I can take that. Yes. Yeah, it's okay. It's a bit more on the what we would call the brown side of things, but it would definitely provide a good layer of insulation. If you want to put that on, do it, put it on fluffily. I assume that you don't have anything growing in there. And then in the spring, you can push it aside. You will probably find that on the bottom of it, it will have broken down much more so than it looks like on the very surface. So look for that. And yeah, I mean, if rather than leaving your soil exposed, that would definitely, adding straw is definitely, a layer of straw is definitely a good idea.
Awesome, thank you. And then a question on soil tests. How often should we do them?
Yeah, I'll take that too. So I just recently had a conversation with a soil scientist actually about that very question. And she says in her own garden, she tests only every couple of years. One thing you want to do is, if you do test, especially in a vegetable garden, once a year seems plenty. If you're finding when the first time you're taking a test, you're finding a very strong, like a pronounced problem, like you have like way too much of something or way too little, you might want to test more often following whatever you did to correct that. In general, unless for that, for a particular reason, you'd get a recommendation to test more often. Test once a year, and that's plenty. Or maybe 1 year, the next year, and then if things are stable, you can do even less. You also want to think about testing at the same time of the year, because the soil conditions definitely change. And so if you can test the same time of the year and use the same laboratory. So if you're going through the King Conservation District, for example, like send them a sample again next fall. That would be plenty.
Awesome. Thank you. And then this is a great question from Judy. Where do you go to sharpen your garden shears so you can get a clean cut when you're trimming?
Yeah, some of the nurseries have sharpening services that come in. You can check with your local nursery, but follow Northwest Sharpening folks because they are one of those folks that travel around. And I actually just opened their website up so I could refer to this for you guys. They are in October 2020. Let's see. Well, they were in Shoreline today at Joanne Fenner's. That doesn't help us now. Next, they're going to be in Madison Park down here in Seattle at City People's, but they're coming back to the Joanne Fabrics, up in Linwood on November 4th, Wednesday. So that's not too far for you guys. That looks like the next closest thing.
Great.
So check in Northwest Sharpening. Look at their website.
And there is one little tool I've used in the past. I forget what it's called, but it's just a short little file, and it's good for like hand pruners or the tree loppers, and it's real simple.
Yes.
To do. So some of it's easy. Next question. Can you divide rhubarb now? I was thinking that February was a better time for that. And then can you harvest the newly divided rhubarb in the first year?
You can divide it now. February is a great time to divide it because it'll actively grow much more quickly. And rhubarb's not a super deep rooted plant, so it doesn't need time to develop a huge root system. And I wait usually after I divide them. I usually give them a year to grow out a bit, unless I have a really big chunk that was a huge plant and divided into a really big division.
Awesome. And while we're talking about rhubarb, is it now a good time to plant rhubarb and blueberries?
Yeah, this is a great time. Soil's still warm, still easy to dig. If you can find them, usually potted this time of year, good time to plant them. Often in the spring, you're going to get these things bare root. You get a bigger plant for better money in bare root sales. So keep your eye out for that as well.
Awesome. How about moving iris bulbs? Is it okay to do that now?
Yeah, absolutely. You can move them anytime it's not frozen or 100 degrees outside. They're pretty sturdy. You can let them sit for a while and then replant them. They're pretty sturdy.
Cool. While we're talking about moving, I got a couple moving questions here. So when's a good time for roadies? And then is fall a good time for small trees? So kind of similar category.
Yeah, I would give them a little bit of time and wait. Rhododendron, you could move now. They have a shallow root system. It's going to be shallow and wide. So make sure you dig out far enough. And, anytime the soil is workable and it's raining and it's not too cold, it's a good time to move them. You don't want to move them when it's too frozen and their leaves are kind of bending down. They do that to reduce leaf surface so they don't transpire as much when it's too cold outside. But something like a small tree, especially a deciduous tree, it's better to wait until it's fully dormant. So November would be a better month. December, if it's not too cold and the ground isn't too cold and frozen.
Great, thank you. How about chopping and dropping lavender? And I would add other herbs to that as well.
Reingard?
Yeah, you definitely can chop and drop that. I personally don't cut back the lavenders, and I just let the flower and seed heads fall underneath, and they just create this nice layer for themselves underneath. And if you want to trim them back, definitely chop and drop them. Just leave it right there. Lavender is also one of those plants that, when Laura was talking about wildlife earlier, I have hummingbirds that come to my lavender plants in the winter months because they don't have much else to find. So another option is to not even do anything. But yes, you can chop and drop them.
Awesome, thank you. Next question is what to do with small pine cones? That's what I would add. Can you use those for a mulch?
So, yeah, I'm not sure if that's the question, but cones are taking a long time to break down. So if you want, you can leave them on the ground if you have a spot where that's, visually fine. They will definitely take a long time to break down. If you put them in your compost, you might find them again when you start sifting it. But yeah, I think that would be mostly a matter of taste and your preferences. Maybe they're pretty enough to make decorative, things out of it. Definitely, you want to make sure with little cones or not so little cones that you get them out of the way where people would step on. They can definitely be ankle breakers.
Great, thanks. And somebody who had squirrels chew the bark of their Japanese maple. She's wondering what to do. Does that injury require care?
Oh boy. Depends on how, you said a small area, so I'm assuming it's not a big cut. Couple dangerous things about cutting through bark. As Reingard mentioned, bark is there to protect the tree from getting water into the interior of the tree where it can cause rot. You don't want to cover it though, even though we are concerned about that, because that actually can trap moisture in and make it worse. Sometimes what people do is trim the edges of it to clean it up a little bit so it's not ragged. And you use like a very sharp, like wood cutting knife to do something like that, or a sawed knife, sort of those curved blade, sharp knives. But leave it alone, let it dry and let it callus over. It will do its own healing eventually. But the dangerous thing would be if it wrapped around the whole trunk, because that could girdle the tree and kill it. But it doesn't sound like that's the case.
Great, thank you. Now we have a question about our native bees. How long do they stay in one spot?
They have generations. Generally, it's the queen that lives over, and they often build a new nest somewhere. Or if it's mason bees or leaf cutters, they're only out for a very short period of time as an adult. And then they're laying eggs like mad and collecting pollen off the fruit trees, like mason bees do. And then they're gone. So it's just those eggs and then the larvae inside the tubes that develop into adults and fly out later. So they're going to stick around, through their whole period where they're in those tubes. But other than that, they're moving around and then they're mating again, and then they start the cycle all over again. They will stay in your yard for years if you have what they need. It's just a matter of having the habitat there. Ground nesters move around though. They will move from place to place. But if you have a good yard, you may still have them.
Great, thanks. So talking back about pruning, so understood that, no major pruning right now, but would midwinter be okay? Sounds like there's a large ceanothus that's grown over, and when's the best time to trim it back?
Yeah, so general rule of thumb is we do more pruning in the winter, in particular deciduous things. And ceanothus, there are some deciduous ceanothus, but I'm assuming this is the evergreen with the blue flowers on it. They get really large. They don't like to be cut back to old wood. They generally don't grow back from that. So when you are rehabbing a ceanothus, sometimes you have to go all the way back into the trunk and take limbs out and let some of the outer growth fill back in. But you often can't rehab them very easily to become a smaller shrub. So you have to sort of stay on top of the heading back prunings when they're younger, or else put them in a place where they can get big and wide open like they get over time. But you can prune it in the winter. You're going to lose flowers if you do that. And sometimes if it's not bothering anything, it might be better to wait until summertime and do some pruning when it's actively growing instead.
Awesome, thank you. If you plant a cover crop next to a lawn, in a bed next to a lawn, how can you keep that from getting into the lawn?
Cover crop is they're annual seeds. So, if a little bit of it gets into the lawn, it's just going to grow until it put out flowers and died, or you pulled it up. They don't typically invade, like the grass lawns are perennial grasses and they have underground stems that run into your garden beds, but annual grasses do not do that. So they're just growing a root system that's holding them in place. So I don't think it would be a big issue. Mostly you would get it if you spilled the seed on the lawn more than by the grass moving through the lawn, unless you let it go to seed and then it's going to seed itself again, but it's still not going to be a big issue.
Reingard, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's, I guess if I would be really concerned, I would probably, I could put some sort of a barrier there in between. But no, I agree with Laura. I wouldn't be concerned about that.
Awesome, thank you. So I have a question. There's a lot of kale growing in different beds. Sounds like it's good to eat. Over the winter, does it help, or does it use up nutrients from the soil? If they want to plant there the next spring, what's something they could do to kind of sustain the soil?
Well, yeah, kale should be moved definitely every year. You don't want to plant anything in that family again in that bed next year, because you run the risk of soil-borne diseases and attracting more of the pests that like kale and cabbages and broccoli. They grow well over the winter. It is beautiful. I have a lot too. So I leave mine in over the winter as well. I follow it often by things in the pea family, so beans or peas, which will help. Even though we're eating the fruit off of them, they work like that cover crop does. They actually add nutrient to the soil. And yes, they do take stuff out of the soil. They're pretty heavy nitrogen feeders, anything in that family.
Great, thanks. And so their backyard is full of weeds. So should they put in a cover crop to improve the soil there?
What do you think?
Well, yeah, well, so I would like to know more about what the weeds are and the site looks like. If you're trying to change this from like a weedy bed into a vegetable garden, my answer would be different from, if you want to put, turn this into a panel area, for example. If you want to replace that area with something new, if you want to, dig it up, put some cover crops in now, and then start from there, that will definitely be an option. Again, it's hard to say without knowing exactly what the weeds are. This could also be a situation where a soil test right now would be useful to find out what the situation is before you actually plant something new.
Laura, anything to add to that?
Situation, but if you're trying to do something new, yes, that's what you don't have to think about cover crops only in a veggie garden. If you have an area in your garden you want to improve the soil, you can use that and then plant a whole new garden there.
Great, thanks. The next question, second to last, is there's an area that they're clearing out and going to use the Back to Eden mulch method to help ready the soil for various fruit bushes, blueberries, huckleberries, but there is bindweed there. Should they rethink this and spend a year with barrier and mulch and try to decrease the bindweed before planting in the bushes?
I don't know what the Back to Eden mulch method is. I'm going to look at it. Oh, okay. It's just sheet mulching. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to touch on that because it's a situation that I've had. I would say if you can be patient and wait a year, and watch what the bindweed is doing. If you really significantly reduce it, that would be great. I could send you a lot of pictures of bindweed going up my blueberries. I don't think you want that. So a heavy sheet mulch, like I was mentioning earlier, a couple layers of cardboard, a thick layer of wood chips on top of that, arborist chips that are mixed would be a really good approach in that. That would definitely also help, you'll get the soil conditions that are pretty good for blueberries because you're going to have a more acidic-ish soil with that combination. And yeah, I would wait a year, definitely. Otherwise, the bindweed. Go ahead.
No, one thing I would add to that is bindweed is what we think we're pulling. The white roots are not roots, they're actually stems. And you can kind of trick it by doing what Reingard just suggested. If you do it thick enough, they start to move up to the surface of the soil. And then when you pull it back, sometimes there'll be more of it to dig out. So you get a better kill on it, so to speak, where you can actually get in the soil and get more of the bindweed out by doing that method.
So in that case, just to clarify, Laura, you would be sheet mulching to try to get it to come up, and then you would pull that back to weed the bed before
Yes,
you plant.
yeah, so you would pull it back, pull it off, and then see if you can dig some of that out of there. Sometimes I've had situations where, like in a pea patch plot, we had a really badly infested one, and we did that for the whole growing season, and we just kept pulling it back and digging it out. So it took a while. It's work. But where it's really infesting something, that can actually help. And it's just sort of tricking it into coming up higher because it thinks that the soil layer is, deeper than it is.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Very last question. It's an easy one. Divide coneflowers now.
I would wait because they have seeds on them right now. So I would let the birds eat them. I would leave, part of the reason we also leave some of this dead growth on a perennial is that it protects the growing points that are at the ground level from when they come up next spring. So that's what mulch does. That's kind of, mulch is this artificial way to do what nature does by itself. But you can leave the material on it, let the birds eat it, trim it back a little bit so, it's not quite as untidy once the seeds are gone. And then in the spring, dig it up and divide it and get it growing again.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. And we have made it to the end here, just 12 minutes later than I promised. So thank you everybody for joining us, for sticking around to the end. Like I mentioned, I'll send up a follow-up email tomorrow with the raffle prize winners and the resource sheet that Laura and Reingard put together. But yeah, just thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, Reingard. And thank you everybody for sticking around and joining us here tonight. So hope you all have a wonderful evening and good luck gardening.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, and yeah, I'll talk to both of you later.
Great, thanks, Cameron. Sorry for all the technical stuff. Boy, that was weird.
It happens. Sometimes it all happens at the same time. So yeah, thanks for sticking it out.
All right, thanks so much.
Yep, you guys have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.
You too. Thank you for your patience.
You bet.
Take care.
Yep.
Bye.